Now we should talk about Turkey. What is her role in the Syrian conflict? What is going to be her role in fightings in Iraq?
Maybe Turkey is the most problematic state in the whole region, and Turkey is the biggest security risk for any neighbor, including Bulgaria, including Greece, including, of course, Armenia, Georgia, Iran, Syria, because Turkey is a sort of super extremist proxy of the US. By the way, until today, we shouldn't forget this. Also, when we speak later about the reapproachment between Ankara and Moscow, Turkey is still NATO member. Turkey had a lot of benefit of the two Iraq wars, which were conducted by the West. Turkey is in the region maybe the most important aircraft carrier and military base of the US. But Turkey is something else. Turkey has in its political psychology the complex of the old Ottoman Empire. So what Erdogan speaks out very openly just some days ago has a deep root in the political psychology of Turkey. They want to be again the big power in the region. The main problem is that this Turkish expansionism coincides with the Western interest of dominating the region. If Turkey wouldn't have opened its borders to Syria, to say it very simple, in Syria, most probably today wouldn't be a terrorist problem. It is in the hands of Ankara to stop the war in Turkey simply by closing the borders for terrorists crossing the Turkish-Syrian border illegally. But since Turkey is one of the main hotspots for incoming international jihadis who want to go to Syria, and Turkey is not doing anything against it, we can say that Turkey is not doing anything to fight terrorism, but to support terrorism. Maybe we could even call the type of terrorism in Syria Turkish state terrorism in this context. What they do in Iraq is the same. Erdogan mentioned that vast areas of Iraq, mainly the Kurdish areas, are more or less historical Turkish territories. So he claimed and he demanded these territories for Turkey, also from Syria, the North Syrian areas. So we see there a very clear expansionist demand by the recent Turkish government, which is communicated in a very serious way. So Turkey is indeed the biggest risk of security, and any neighbor of Turkey should be overly careful, because the sword of Erdogan can turn any time against anyone in the neighborhood, and one should always take into account that Erdogan is still backed and supported by the US.
And we talk about Turkey and Russia.
Yes.
What is your opinion about the rapprochement between them?
When we see the Turkish-Russian relations not just now in the last years, but in the last decades, we see a sort of diplomatic roller coaster. If we just look in the media, we see something between best friends and best enemies. What has also to do with maybe very dedicated and emotional media reports on both sides. So when we look in Russian media, after the downing of the Russian plane by the Turkish Air Force last year in fall, Erdogan became the worst enemy of all, and Russian media was joyfully discussing the renaming of Istanbul to Constantinople. I think Zhirinovsky was playing the Russian John McCain and speaking about nuclear bombs on Ankara. So we had all these emotional debates on the one side, and then from one day to the other, Turkey is our partner and friend. But we shouldn't get irritated by media reports. We have to see that Moscow knows very well what neighbor, because Turkey is also somehow the neighbor of the Russian Federation when we look to the Black Sea, for example. And they have always to deal with Turkey, with the one or the other side. So we had reapproachments in the past, especially when it came to questions of future energy deals. There Turkey is, of course, important. Turkey is until today having the hands on the Bosporus, which is very important for the Russian Federation. On the other side, Turkey has also its hands in the problems in Crimea. Turkey was supporting extremist Tatarian organizations for a long time. They were also financing and supporting Tatarian militias, which were founded by Ukraine for conquering back Crimea. All these things which are, of course, I'm very convinced, seen in Moscow. But how to deal with such neighbor, with such a problem like the Turkish Republic, especially when it's governed by someone like Erdogan. So you have them somewhere close, you have them somewhere a little bit more far, and whenever you can create some inner turmoil or inner discussion, as we have now when it comes to the question of the Western alliance of Turkey, is it, of course, in the interest of Moscow to bring Turkey as far as possible away from its Western allies. But this is, as I said, it's like a swing politics. Sometimes Turkey goes a little bit more far, but that has to do with the fact that Erdogan knows very well that he can blackmail the West. Always when Erdogan is flying to Moscow to meet Putin, the West becomes very nervous. And by coincidence, when Erdogan comes back, he is presenting his new demands to the West. May it be concerning the refugee crisis, where he blackmails Europe. May it be the presence of America and it's his alliance with NATO. Erdogan knows very well that he needs the NATO because he couldn't finance and he couldn't maintenance his army. He's very proud that he has one of the hugest army, I think the second hugest army in the NATO alliance. But all that wouldn't be possible, and he knows very well that if he would go into an alliance with Russia, Russia would do anything but not financing the maintenance of his huge army. So we have there a swing politics, a diplomatic roller coaster. Right now we witness the big friendship, and it's not excluded that we might witness in 3 months again the big hostility and the big enemies.
There are comments about expansion of the conflict zones and even military actions in Eastern Europe. How likely is to happen and in what plan?
I think we have in Eastern Europe some sleeping danger zones which can pop up anytime. I would always define a danger zone as a zone where we have both powers as a certain influence. That means we have EU and America on one side, and on the other side, may it be in terms of governance or even also opposition, we have the eastern side, the Russian side. If we look, we have in Bosnia a sleeping war, I would almost call this. Bosnia is in a status quo since the middle of the 90s, since the agreements there, where we have the Republika Srpska and the so-called federation on the other side. There are two entities in one country, and these two entities are right now balancing each other. But Bosnia, the central government of Bosnia, is indeed very much pro-Western. They want to be member of the EU. They want to be member of NATO. They cannot do this because the entity of the Republika Srpska is opposing it. So there we have one of these zones. We have also Kosovo, where we have this conflict between the Serbs and the Albanians. Albanians backed by the West, Serbs backed by the East. We have the problems in countries like Macedonia and Montenegro, where also the two powers have their assets. But we shouldn't underestimate also countries which are completely calm today. And there I wouldn't just look on Eastern Europe. Just an example, in 2010 or 2011, whoever would have said that Ukraine would burst in a war, that parts of Ukraine will split off the country. Even I think if one would have said this in Donetsk or in Lugansk in 2010, this person would have been considered a total lunatic. But this is the situation today. So we shouldn't get fooled by our today's estimations about the developments of the future. We don't know what will happen in Germany, maybe already next year. We don't know what will happen in France, where the banlieues are burning, not just since last year, since years. We shouldn't get surprised if trouble explodes all of the sudden in Italy. I would say that maybe Eastern Europe is even that part of Europe which knows how to deal with these problems, because they are the ones who are putting a strict stance on the topics of mass migration, which also means the migration of terrorism. Maybe we will wake up in a Europe in 10 years where Eastern Europe is the cradle of stability, while Central and Western Europe are collapsing in violence and war. And maybe people like me will be refugees in Bulgaria. We don't know.
What do you think about the intent of Kiev to input foreign military mission on territory of Donbass? What was the reaction in Russia? And connected with that, what should happen with after killing of Arsen Petrov Motorola? So many people which gave honor to him.
The funeral was last Wednesday, one week ago, and I was at the funeral. It was an amazing event because the funeral coincided with the Normandy meeting in Berlin, where the head of states of France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine were negotiating the situation in Ukraine, especially also in the two republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. One could expect that everyone also in Donetsk and Lugansk would have watched to Berlin, what is discussed there. But what happened was something else. Tens of thousands of people voluntarily went to the funeral of Motorola to deliver and to show the last honor for this person, for this fighter who is considered there everywhere as a war hero. In my opinion, what we witnessed on Wednesday was a sort of referendum by feet. So the people were not forced to go to the funeral. They went there absolutely voluntarily. And the masses of people paying respect to someone, a warrior, and not someone who is known as a big negotiator, a chess player, a diplomat, but someone who defended his country and someone who won some very decisive battles during the war in 2014 is something I would really consider as, in reality, a referendum. And this referendum very clearly said, we are not going to bow to Kiev. We are not going to be an entity which will be inside Ukraine. This is what the people expressed by this. So, to say it in a very short way and maybe in a nutshell, whatever the guys and whoever discussed in Berlin doesn't have any influence on the psychology of the people in Donbass. They want their independence, and with the big support for Motorola's funeral and also for his family, they made very clear that they are going again to fight for this if necessary.
What do you think about the intent of Kiev to input foreign military mission on the territory of Donbass?
Yeah. This is, by the way, a huge topic in Donbass. It is very hardly discussed because the people there, they don't want, for example, an armed mission of the OSCE, what would be an international military mission in Donbass. All the international or multinational organizations, may it be the UN, may it be the OSCE, don't enjoy a lot of trust in Donbass. That has certain reasons. OSCE observers generally are seen also as sort of agents on the one side, and I think this is not so wrong. And on the other side, they are seen as those people who are not interested in the fate of the ordinary people when it comes to shortage of food, electricity, and water. The OSCE is not really seen as a helpful organization. So mainly people see in the OSCE somehow a collection of foreign spies. By the way, if you ask, it was the same in Damascus or if it is in Donetsk, if you want to see where international observers are, the best thing is you go to one of the most expensive restaurants or hotel clubs and you will find the people there, but not in the battle zone, not where they are needed, and not where they could be really helpful. I think that the Russian Federation has maybe a very diplomatic stance towards international armed mission in Donbass. Because what is included in this program, when we speak about an international armed mission in Donbass, it is included that the authorities of Donetsk and Lugansk would have to give back the control of the borders to the Russian Federation, first maybe to the OSCE, which would give it later to the Ukrainian authorities. The border control is one of the most decisive problems and challenges for an independent state, or for a state which wants to be sovereign and independent. So this is, in the eyes of many people in Donbass, never going to happen. They would never give back those borders. They were fighting so hard to control them. By the way, again, maybe a little ironically remark, Angela Merkel could learn a lot from the Donbass people how important borders can be.